In this section, we're going to learn about 3 different ways to solve a quadratic equation. And first, let's just define what a quadratic equation is. Well, a quadratic equation in a variable x, it's usually the variable we use, is an equation that can be written in the general form as ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So a, b, and c are just real numbers, and obviously a cannot be a 0 because that would make this term go away and we wouldn't have an x squared term. A quadratic requires an x squared term. This is also known as a second degree polynomial in the equation x. I'm sorry, second degree polynomial equation in the variable x. Second degree because the exponent, the largest exponent of the x is 2. All right, well, one thing, you may not know it by this name, I'm sure you've used this before. It's the zero factor property that I'll refer to sometimes as ZFP. If a and b are algebraic expressions, which means they could be numbers, or they could be like x plus 5, b could be 2x plus 2, something like that. If you have 2 algebraic expressions, then a times b is equal to 0. If and only if what? How can you get 2 things multiplying together to give you a 0? Well, either a, that expression is equal to 0, or b, that expression is equal to 0. One of them, either one or both of them will be 0 if you multiply them together and you get 0. So, let's solve this quadratic equation by factoring and using the zero factor property. Okay, first we factor. All right, I need an x and I need an x and I need needs to multiply together to give me a positive 15, but they add together to give negative 8, so it needs to be a negative times a negative, 5 and 3. And if you FOIL this out, you'll see you get this. Okay, so we've already factored it, and now using the zero factor property, this is like my a and that's like my b from up above. So either that's equal to 0 or that's equal to 0. So either x minus 5 is equal to 0, x minus 5, or x minus 3 is equal to 0. And solve both of these, and we would get, by adding 5 to both sides, we get x equals 5. By adding 3 to both sides, we get x equals 3. So these are the 2 solutions, or you could write them like this. The 2 solutions. This is the solution set to this quadratic equation. If you plug in a 3 or a 5, you'll get a 0. Plug in any other number for x, and you will not get a 0. All right, this one, this next example just requires a little bit more arithmetic, if you will, or algebra. It says solve by factoring and using the zero factor property. So the first thing I'll do is multiply this out on the right, FOIL it out, and then combine like terms and get all the terms on one side and 0 on the other. So we would get 7 minus 7x, no change there on the left. And now let's FOIL this out. 3x times x is 3x squared. That's the f of FOIL. Outer would be a negative 3x, but inner would be 2x. So a negative 3x plus 2x is simply a minus x. And then the last would be 2 times negative 1 or minus 2. So far, all I have done is FOILed out the right-hand side. And now I need to get 0 on one side. So let's get 0 on the left in this case. So I'm going to do 2 things in one step. I'm going to subtract 7 from both sides. And I'm going to add 7x to both sides. So that should get me 0 on the left And on the right, I'll get a 3x squared. 7x minus x is plus 6x. A negative 2 and a negative 7 gives me a negative 9. Okay, so maybe I'll rewrite it like this, putting the 0 on the right-hand side, just out of preference. Now, we're done with step 1, but we're not done with the problem yet. We have it in the standard form. Notice this is just like this form, ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So in this case, our a would be 3, our b would be 6, our c would be a negative 9. Now, let's factor this. Well, whenever you factor the left-hand side, the first thing you want to say is there a greatest common factor we could pull out? And indeed there is. So let's pull out the 3. 3 goes into 3, 6, and 9. 3 times x squared plus 2x minus 3 equals 0. So I just divided all three of these numbers by 3, giving a 1, a 2, and a negative 3. And if you divide both sides by 0, sorry, that can't be done. Divide both sides by 3, we'll get rid of this 3 right here. So now we have x squared plus 2x minus 3 is equal to 0. We'll factor and use the zero factor property. Factoring is going to give us an x and an x, and then two numbers that multiply to negative 3 and add together to positive 2. We're going to need a positive and a negative. We know that because positive times negative gives us negative. The positive needs to be bigger, so it's going to be a positive 3 and a negative 1. You can FOIL this out and verify that you get x squared plus 2x minus 3. So now the zero factor property says set this equal to 0 and set that equal to 0, and we have our two solutions. So we can see that the solution to this one is going to be a negative 3. You add 3 to both, you subtract 3 from both sides and you get a negative 3. And on this one we'd have to add 1 to both sides and we get x equals 1. So that's the solution to number 3.